and welcome everyone for this School Education Gateways thematic webinar on vocational education and training. As you know, it's one of the annual themes on School Education Gateway, and that's why we are focusing on each webinar on these different topics. And for the next hour, we will have two different speakers. We have Andreas Koth and Klaus Miesenberger, who will introduce their topics a bit more in detail, and they will pronounce their names more correctly than I did. And I'm going to try to start my webcam as well. So hello everyone who have joined, and I'm here at the European Schoolnet in Brussels in Belgium. And so if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to put them into the chat box and we will answer them from there after the presentations are done. And of course we will share the recording and the slides as usual, so if you miss any details or links, it's okay, you can and have a look at them afterwards. So now Klaus, you're ready to start your presentation. You can also turn on your camera if you wish to. Yeah.
One moment.
So it's there at the top next to the microphone. One.
I don't see the camera.
Yeah, and then it should say somewhere on your screen like start sharing.
Here it is. Got it.
Okay. Okay, as you wish.
Yeah. Yeah, but I will switch it off anyway. It's boring.
Okay.
So
Klaus, I'll leave the floor, the virtual floor to you.
Okay, that's exciting for me. I didn't do a lot of virtual presentations so far, so I do hope I'm able to make myself understandable and understood. Klaus Miesenberger, my name, you pronounced it perfectly right. Thank you for that. And actually I'm not an educator. Of course I'm an educator. I work at university as a researcher in computer science, and my focus, my main field of research is assistive technology for people with disabilities, and with this accessibility of software, information and communication technology. And I was invited to give a short hint about this topic and bring it into discussion for inclusive education. So excuse if I say something wrong about educational issues or whatever, because this is actually not my main topic. Assistive technology and eAccessibility, actually one could think there is no need to talk about it because all ingredients are there. I think everybody knows that assistive technology and accessibility are technically available. There are technical solutions for almost any issue in this domain. There is the need for individuals. We know about the benefit for aging population, people with vision problems, motor problems, hearing problems, cognitive problems, how important these technologies are. We know about the economic benefit of these technologies. We know about the social and social economic benefit. But when it comes to the implementation and the use of assistive technology, everybody says, oh my God, this technology is so complex, how should I use this? I do not know about the end users and so on, and in particular also about accessibility. Others feel bored because the topic is coming up to the agenda very often. Since 20 years there are more directives, more initiatives about, and this makes people bored. And finally, what is most crucial, many people have the feeling this is a technical issue, somebody else is responsible for it. It's not my fault about accessibility, and everybody hands it over to somebody else. The technical guy says we have solved the technical issues, it's about implementation, and the educational part or the social inclusive part, they say, oh, this is technically complex, somebody else has to do it. And in the end, the issue is accessibility, the potential of new technologies, the potential of assistive technologies, and the accessibility is actually not used. What is core to eAccessibility? First, one could say this is all about these fancy high technologies like exoskeleton, nanotechnologies which go into our body, 3D, 4D environments, artificial intelligence or whatever. But the question is this inclusion? This is more about medical issues. This is about healing, about rehabilitation. And this is not, so to say, getting to the core of inclusion. Where inclusion happens is what everybody of us has in his pockets, and at the moment everybody have in front of you. It's the human-computer interface. And the actual interesting thing about the human-computer interface is it is rather simple, it's rather stable, and we use it on an everyday basis, although we never got introduced to it or learned about it. It is a limited number of elements, windows, icons, menus, and the pointer which is switching around. And of course there are much more issues which you see on the desktop, but you can reduce it to this limited number of elements. When you look into programming libraries, and there are studies which were done by big development companies, more than 95% of all the applications are developed and designed using less than 18 interface elements. 18 elements are in use, and the limited number of actions, point and click, drag and drop, gestures which we might use. And with these limited number of actions and interactions, we are able to interface and use the unlimited number of applications which are out there. Not only on the desktop, on our mobile devices, but we all know when we go to an ATM, when we handle our heating at home, when we sit in a car or wherever, it's everywhere the same interface which we are using. We learn it once, and when we have learned it, we can apply it everywhere. And we take it with us because it's actually rather stable. It doesn't change a lot. Why? Because if it would change a lot, if companies would change it a lot, users would not follow. So I try to switch to the next, sorry. It's a bit slow by switching. And this changes all the interfaces we had. I think you remember, here are some examples of so-called old interfaces. I called it old interfaces, and perhaps you remember using a video recorder several years ago. Wasn't it a nightmare? You had to use a manual of 70 pages, and when the video recorder was broken and you had to use a new one, the whole thing started from scratch again. And this all changed step by step. For all the appliances which we use nowadays, we use the same simple, stable human-computer interface. And this is the access point, and this is the potential for people with disabilities, because there is a huge amount of assistive technologies for all the diverse disabilities that they can interface this human-computer interface. And the good thing about is, with old technology, providing interfaces to all the different appliances was almost impossible. But for the human-computer interface, it's one interface. It's a standard which we are using, and this makes it much easier for inclusion. And the human-computer interface is the central access point we have to focus at, and we have to enable people that they can access the human-computer interface. And also in the future, when we go away from our desktop, from mouse and keyboard, when we use touch and mobile devices, when we use virtual reality, augmented reality, we use the same interaction principles. Also for body near interfaces, is when the interface goes into clothes, into the environment, and even tangible interfaces, or whatever the future non-classical interfaces might be, it is always the same adaptable, easy, stable, and universal principle. There is a user, there is a standardized human-computer interface, which is varying, but the principles stay the same, and with this we can interface all the systems and services which are out there. And this is the access point for people with disabilities, and this is the focus where our work is to be done for inclusion of people with disabilities, providing first of all assistive technologies in the information and digital society that they can access the standardized human-computer interface, and making sure that the interfaces, the mainstream applications, what includes also e-educational interfaces, that they take into account accessibility issues. And this allows us, also for the educational domain, but for any domain in our society, that we can focus on 7 domains, 7 roles and competences which are needed, which are the 4 user, assistive technology, HCI, and the systems and services out there, and the interfaces between them. And let me shortly go through them the next minutes to say where is the core necessity, where are the core requirements for the inclusion of people with disabilities, but also for many other users with specific needs, be it due to migration background, be it due to aging or whatever, wherever educational issues, but also for mainstream society. It's everywhere the same. It's everywhere the same interaction principle. When we start from the left, and that's good to do, to start from the user, one key issue is involving the user in the design process, not only technically, but also in the design of content, in the design of learning environments, in the design of working environments. When we look into the World Health Organization classification of health and function and disability, they have simply 1,400 categories of different disabilities and special needs. So there is not one user with a disability, with vision, hearing, motor, other problems. We have to involve the users to learn what are the specific needs, and otherwise we are not able to accommodate the technology, the human-computer interface, the assistive technology for them. And this is in particular more important for the interface between the user and the assistive technology. We have to assess what are the skills, what can a user do. It might the user might have a severe disability, but with a very basic skill of handling a simple switch or even a brain-computer interface, we are able to interface this stable, standardized and simple human-computer interface. And there is a particular, and for me always striking, issue about education, because this area of assessment, personalization, is always done at the end of education. We always assess users at the end of the year. We start and we think there is a very common basis of learning, interacting, communicating, but we do not take into account the assessment at the beginning, first to look at the user. What are the skills? What are his preferences? What are his orientations toward accessing content? Developing such an e-profile should allow us to personalize and adapt learning paths much better to the individual needs of users, and in particular for those with disabilities we are talking about. Assistive technologies, I mean, I could talk for hours. There are multimodal and multimedia possibilities for almost any kind of disability. I have one slide here. I don't know if the videos will work. It seems not in this presenter, but it doesn't matter. For any of these 1,400 categories, for vision, for hearing, for cognitive problems, for motor problems, for any other problem, there are assistive technologies nowadays available, and they are very complex, for the most complex task one could imagine. But we can be sure they are able to interface this basic human-computer interaction, and this allows them to take part in the diverse settings in our society, in particular also in education. When we come from assistive technology to the HCI, it's about accessibility. And I assume most of you will have learned about web accessibility guidelines, software accessibility guidelines. The key issue is assistive technology and e-inclusion only works if mainstream systems take them into account. And immediately we recognize this is a complex technical thing. Web accessibility standard, for example, has 36 pages, and they need 230-page long document called understanding that they can explain the standard, and many more paperwork for this technical approach. And again, The fear is back. Oh my God, how should I do this as an educator for job inclusion or wherever? How can I implement this? The good thing and the good news is all mainstream tools which we are using nowadays, they support accessibility already. They have accessibility features included. The bad news, very often they are not used, very often they are not known, and this leads to a situation that materials produced and used are not accessible. What do you use in your practice of education? I assume these are the office products, these are browsers on the web, these are content management systems for web applications, and also e-learning systems. All of these devices, these software tools, they have accessibility on board. And actually this makes it rather easy to implement accessibility. I always try to bring it down to 7 steps. 7 seems to be a good number, and then to have some sub categories. This works rather fine. I don't go through them. The issue is, based on the accessibility features of mainstream applications, it is rather easy for anybody to implement accessibility. Of course, there are complex issues like mathematics, chemistry, physics, music, video accessibility, dynamic content, laboratory applications, simulations, easy to read applications, whatever. The one thing, the recommendation is, first of all, use tools and standards. If you use a proper math tool with MathML, HTML, this is the basis for accessibility and assistive technologies, and you do not a lot wrong. And the second issue, cooperation. It's not all on you. You do not have to do all on yourself. A lot of experts are out there, in particular people with disabilities themselves. They know exactly how to work this out, and there is a need of management change management to involve these different expertise in the educational procedures, but also in all other domains in our society that accessibility and inclusion can be put in place. When we go further to the right, the HCI, it is the same issue. We always have to look for the potential of new interface technologies coming along, but also the risk for accessibility. So there's not a lot to be discussed. When it's about the interface between the human, the HCI, and systems and services, I only mention here also the need of using coding standards in education for learning materials. I mention here learning object metadata, SCORM, or whatever they are. I'm not an expert in these domains, but one thing is for sure: if they are used, and if they are used in the right way, the biggest part of accessibility is solved. And one particular issue, we have to use this potential of e-learning, of personalizing learning. If we stuff our classroom with a whiteboard and use it only as an alternative to the blackboard, and in the same way, this will not support inclusion. We need learning objects, very granular objects, different media which are presented, and this will allow learning paths which are also open for a diversity of users. If we stuff our classroom with a lot of iPads and use them for document reading, in the same way as we read school books before, this is not e-learning. This is not using the potential of these new media. The key issue is to use them for implementing personalized, flexible learning paths, and this will allow adaptivity, personalization, and reuse of these learning objects for different end users in the future. And systems and services, people with disabilities are in the end then enabled that they can use the same systems and services, Internet of Things. I mentioned here ambient assisted living to support people with disabilities in their own home, but also learning environments and so on, to be more successful, to be able to participate in society. What is important, what is key? Assistive technology and accessibility have to be part of education. This is important towards the own domain of people with disabilities, special education, inclusive education, training of people with disabilities that they are able, first of all, to master the human-computer interface, but also rehabilitation experts, educational experts, service and care providers. And then we can reach out and also demand for that software developers, designers, architects, management people, law administration, mainstream education and so on, that they understand what accessibility is and are able to implement it. Perhaps we need something like a curriculum initiative to look up all the curricula where these issues have to be mentioned. And in the end, let me say, whatever we do, technology will never be a solution in itself. Inclusion is a social issue of empathic acceptance of the diversity of learners, of users, of citizens in our society, and this can never be done by technology on its own. Technology can only be a tool for that. So let me summarize my intervention with some theses. The first thing in inclusive education is focus on the HCI with assistive technology and accessible content. This is the entrance for many users with people with disabilities that they can participate in education and society. Enable this personalization and support the assessment of the individual needs. Have a close look at each individual, what the preferences, what the skills, what the competencies are, and start from there. Do the easy accessibility with the tools there. You don't have to be an expert. An average user and a basic user is able to produce accessible content with standard tools. Change management. I mentioned 7 roles which are important for inclusion. They have to be taken up. Not everybody has to do it, but somebody has to manage it, that these competencies are made available. Cooperation, it's not all on one person, on you or anybody. All the competencies, all the nerds and experts are out there, and they have to be integrated in this new framework of learning, new framework of work, new framework of social interaction, social gathering and participation. And educate. Education is core. It is really a shame, in particular when I look into the situation in my country, even in special education, there is no mention about these issues of taking up these assistive technology and accessibility issues in education. Of course, it's a selective topic, but in the core curricula, these issues are not respected. And in the end, of course, inclusion is and will stay a social issue. With this, let me say thank you, and there is a lot of change going on.
Thank you, Klaus, for your really interesting presentation. So, does anyone in the audience have any questions about these topics? I saw there was a lot of discussions about using technology in the classroom and how to use technology. For example, Hannah had this question, or more like a comment, that there's a feeling that a lot of us only use our mobile phones in a very basic way, but is it the same true for education technology? Because we only see the very basic way in which it can help learning. So do you have any opinions on that, how to best use this technology?
I could not agree more to this comment. In particular, when we look into learning, e-learning systems, most of the time Moodle and all these technologies are used, so to say, as a communication platform. You upload your slides, you upload your handout, and that's it. And that's what is then called e-learning. It is not, in my opinion. E-learning is breaking down the content in chunks which can be learned by different media, which can be learned in different paths with different preferences, where then one can also design and define what is needed for different groups in the class and so on. And this would be then a first step towards e-learning. At the moment, as I experience it, we only copy
thank you a lot.
very traditional
any other questions?
Education and learning.
Otherwise, you can still ask questions
systems.
after the webinar has ended, so there's still time. And if no other questions, we can move on to the next presentation as well. So let me just switch to another document. And thank you so much, Klaus, for your presentation. So next, Andreas, I will leave this this virtual floor to you now for your presentation.
Yeah, my name is Andreas Koth. I represent two organizations today. One is IB, as you can see on the bottom right corner. That's the International Bund, or International Association. It's a vocational service provider and social service provider. And on the other hand, a network, which is EVB. It's a network of vocational training providers. And I try to give you an approach from the other side, not from only the technology side. And Klaus said it should be people-centered, and that's what we try to do. We try to have different approaches to see how technology can be enhancing people and what they do, and especially educators. And maybe.
Yeah, sorry if to interrupt. It's a little bit unclear, your voice. Maybe could you speak closer to the microphone or increase the volume, because it's quite low at the moment. A little bit. Can people hear you? Maybe you can speak up, so or turn on the volume from the options, so just so we can hear what you say. Is it? Could the participants tell us if they can hear any better, or is it
Yeah.
Not really. Okay. Do you have any headsets that we can maybe switch before you start? Okay, now I think we lost you. If you could connect your microphone again, then we will be able to hear you. Hello, can you hear us? Hi, Andreas. Can you still hear us? Yes. Apologies. We're just gonna fix the sound so that you can. That's why there is no sound at the moment. Hi, Andreas. Can you try to? Yes. Now we can hear you. Yeah.
I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Now it's better. Okay. Now it's better. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know. As I said, I would like to pick up where Klaus left off. The technology is one part, and but the individual, the person, and the people and organizations are the other part. We have to deal with technology and use it for the enhancement of education and people. And yeah, just a little bit about my background. I'm a teacher, an examined teacher. I'm also was involved or have experience as a headmaster in a vocational training center, and also as a headmaster in a secondary school. And from that perspective, I can say that technology has taken over classrooms already, and a lot of teachers and educators are not really aware how to use those. But we come to that later. Maybe first of all, I would like to go what I would like to tell you about some projects. First of all, the European Network of Technology and Enhanced Learning in an Inclusive Society. I'll tell you what that is later on. And somehow it doesn't go further. Oh, yeah. And then the project, which is still ongoing, funded by the European Union, is Erasmus Plus project, the European Quality Assurance and transnational vet mobility through socially responsible behavior. And briefly then, Migrants in Care, a very brand new project, which is about the mobile learning app in the care service. So yeah, there is a network, the Network for Technology Enhanced Learning in an Inclusive Society. And that was set up to bridge a digital divide between people with disabilities and the technology. How did it all start? It was an LLLP, Lifelong Learning Project, in 2013 to 2016. and had the objective to create an action-oriented network that addresses the major societal challenge, to bridge the digital divide, to reach a digital inclusion. The network itself contains of three big major networks, the AAATE, big network that is the ASPD, and EVVB mentioned before. But a lot of other partners, as you can see here, including some universities and other partners from all over Europe. What we tried to do is to join forces and expertises to develop strategies and tools, to remove barriers at all levels, and support the development of digital skills of persons with disabilities of all ages. What are the barriers? And that was something we were talking about in great detail, because there are a lot of barriers, and we came up with three main barriers or subcategories. This is society, the community, and person. For the society ones, I mean, just to name a few, is for example, the insufficient or inadequate legislation, or a lack of priority given to ICT/AT education, or even stereotyped view of disabilities, or a deficit model of people with disabilities, etc., etc. For the community, you can imagine it's more what you can do or what maybe you have to face is the lack of ICT and ICT/AT competences and confidences to use technology among professionals. And that's what we already addressed before. Or the educational system is not fully prepared to support learners with disabilities in developing their ICT and ICT/AT skills. And if you talk about people in person, of course, they have their own barriers. For example, low self-confidence, or the fear that technology use might reduce human care or in contact, especially, for example, when it comes to social care, or the risk related to personal data treatment, what happens, or fear of losing control over technology. All these have to be taken into account when you talk about education and projects which want to overcome those barriers. We go further. I was stuck. There we go. Yeah, what did we do? We tried to for people with disabilities, we tried to create an access to opportunities in education and employment by using technology. By participation, or create opportunities to participate in society or more fulfilled lives. For education and training providers, even there we looked into what to do. For example, for a more inclusive education, better access to curricula. That's what Klaus mentioned before. How can we access the curricula using technology? Or for employers, even that, look into the skill sets that better match job requirements. Or more independent workers, what we're aiming for. And for society, not to forget that we're respecting human rights according to the UNCRPD, or a more inclusive society. So what did we come up with? We developed a roadmap to full digital inclusion. That means that we define steps how to get there. We created a work program how to get there. And not to forget, projects always have a beginning and an end. We tried to continue the good work by signing an MOU in October 2016 for at least 3 more years to continue the work, to continue bridging the digital divide. By monitoring the transformation process, meaning removing barriers, setting goals, and looking into the needs, initiating projects among Entellus partners, for example, or spreading the message in workshops and webinars like today. We're stuck again. Yeah. So how did we do that? Two more examples. One would be the project mentioned, the Stay Mobile, the European Quality Assurance and Transnational Web Mobility. It's quite interesting what you can do for example, to use technology for example, in transnational mobilities. For example, to provide eAccessibility or accessibility to tools for all actors involved in order to ensure quality and continuously improve the quality in mobilities and increase broad awareness of good and ethical and social impeccable behavior during the mobility. How? For example, developing a framework of indicators, meaning what hinders us, for example, to use technology or to put people with disabilities in the or give them the opportunity to join mobilities. And developing a toolkit, for example, and that is one of the core outcomes of this, or will be one of the core, still an ongoing project, the core outcomes of the project, to develop a self-audit tool, which is web-based, for mobility organizers, mobility users, and in the end, policymakers, to find out how inclusive is what we do, and is there enough access for all kinds of participants. And then a skill box, including a performance skills test for mobility users. The second project I would like to point out maybe is the very new one, Migrants in Care. It's just started. The kickoff meeting has been, will be next week. The objectives here are three, and I think they are quite vital. First of all, enhance access to training, and in this particular case for migrants, were so far greatly or widely excluded from training. Then the validation of non and informal training and learning, and pursue flexible learning pathways in school and work-based settings to migrants and refugees. And then continue the continuous vocational training to better address learning groups. And the learning groups are not just the migrants itself or the end users, it's also the staff and the staff in the care sector and the companies. And one of the outcomes will be the recommendations, of course, for educational stakeholders and for policymakers. Are we going to do this? Well, basically for develop a mobile learning app. We were talking about before, Klaus was saying that we use these micro devices or the mobile phones and etc., but we don't use it to the full extent. And then, of course, we would like to have some recommendations at the end for upscaling the vocational educational training. So I would like to conclude by giving you some takeaway messages. For example, and that was Klaus always said as well, when it comes to e-accessibility and e-inclusion in the field of VET, it is important that the focus is always on the person and never only on the technology as such. So for you, it should be person before technology. Or for the e-accessibility and e-inclusion, the technology provides bridges to overcome the digital divide and offers opportunities for users, staff, service providers, and policymakers for better access to education and society. So, technology offers opportunities. And in the long term, investment in training and education on and with technology are necessary for users, staff, service providers, equally to assure quality, like said in the examples above, of the services and the life of all actors involved. And training for all is necessary, and especially for the staff. And barriers have to be identified and removed or overcome systematically, or overcome the barriers. So, lots has been done already. Loads more needs to be done. The technology creates opportunities for the accessibility and inclusiveness of education. So altogether, I would invite you to join us to make it happen. thank you for your attention. And I would like to thank also for the opportunity to be here. My dear colleague from the European Commission, just Talab had to do. So from now I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you, Andreas, so much for your presentations. Any questions to Andreas or Klaus about their presentations or the ideas? Saw that there was a lot of some discussion, further discussion on technology in the classroom, and as I said, it should be the to help people through technology and not the other way around. Silly. I'll see people typing, so let's see if there are any questions or further comments. And Hannah asks, how do you respond to people who say it is very expensive for our school? It's a very good question. You can go ahead, Andreas.
Is it for both of us or for me? I mean, usually the technology is already there. It is not only about the investment. For example, I mean, here we experience, or in Germany, I can only say, quite often that, for example, mobile phones are banned from the lessons. But there you already have a technology that you can use, or you can use that in order, for example, not only phoning and typing messages, but also for research, and also to connect to other people for example, via Bluetooth, etc., etc. So I mean, these things are already there. The question is how to use it, and as Klaus put it, just to have an iPad to read, like in the book, not what it's all about. So, first of all, I would recommend to use what we already have before making a huge investment.
If I can add to that, I agree. I mean, in particular, assistive technologies might tend to become a major issue, and it's not only technology. You need somebody establishing it, maintaining it, keeping it up working, training people, because this is of course a much more important issue. But one thing we have to be aware of, and that's why I mentioned the term change management, people with disabilities are taken care of already, but the setting is different. What is very often not really done is, so to say, a shift of focus from very specialized, segregated education and to transfer to these resources into inclusive settings. And of course this is not an easy process, but this is, so to say, the first step to do. Of course, technology becomes cheaper, easier to get, easier to build, much more efficient, no question, but also to use the resources which are already there in the right way. And this is a question not of technology, this is a question, a political decision, this is a management decision, an organizational decision.
Thank you both. There's one more question. Is by YOD the future in education or the present?
I didn't get that. Once more, please.
Is by YOD the future in education or the present? Bring your own device, Hannah explains. Thank you.
I do think in terms of, for example, at our university we run a support center for students with disabilities, and a requirement what we are doing with students before they come to university is sort out that your assistive devices are with you, and the better you are trained, the easier it will be for you to enter university. In our country, for example, assistive technologies are subsidized and supported and even paid by public bodies, and they are personal. So they take it to education, they take it to the job and so on. And I think this is also, or might be, a way also for education, so to say, that this preparation, equipping with technology can be done before people enter an educational setting. Not to forget, the environment has to be trained and has to be prepared as well.
Okay, thank you both. Any other final questions for Andreas or Klaus? Meanwhile, just to remind you, if you came here a little bit late, it's fine. We have recorded this session and you can find the recording afterwards. And if you want to have the slides, we will of course share them with you afterwards as well in the pages. So I guess here I can just put this slide here afterwards. So any other final questions? I would like to say big thank you to Andreas and Klaus for taking your time and presenting. It's been really interesting. And also for the participants. So take the feedback survey. I'll put the link over there as well. And we would like to hear your opinions and your ideas for these webinars. So unless there are any other questions, we can stop the recording.